Hello! Happy Earth Day and welcome back to Prairie Stories. Today we're continuing our reading of The Animal Family by Randall Jarrell, and we're reading Chapter 4, The Bear. The bear's wet nose was cold and shiny, and he stuck it into everything. He had beautiful fur. It was denser and shinier than the bear skin on the bed. And it wasn't black, but a soft, deep brown. The palms of his paws were as pink as a man's palms, but fringed with 5 little gray-blue steely claws. He had one special log that he liked to sharpen them on. The mermaid would feel them and marvel that their pet had such sharp claws. And the hunter seemed gentle to her too, so that she said to him once, feeling the razory heads on his arrows, "It's queer for you to have things like that." The hunter said with a smile that bared his white teeth, "We've all got them, I guess." "That's right," admitted the mermaid, baring hers. The bear loved for the hunter and the mermaid to pet him, or push him, or hit him, or roll him over. His motto seemed to be, "Go ahead, it won't hurt me." He would sit up, and they would toss the leather ball to him in a gentle arc, and he would catch it in his mouth, or bat at it with his paws, scrambling after it when he missed it. He sat up and begged very beautifully, and he could walk on 2 legs almost as well as on 4. When he would walk across the room on his hind legs, reach for something on the table, and then cram it into his mouth, he looked like a little boy in a bearskin. But not for long. He grew so fast that they couldn't believe it. By the time the geese flew south that fall, the hunter could barely lift him. It was no wonder that he grew so. Everything they gave him, everything that he came across in the meadow or in the forest or on the beach, he ate. The mermaid said, "Why, if you put his chair in his bowl, he'd eat it." Wood rats and meadow mice, meadow grass, buttercups, roots and nuts and seeds and buds, grubs, worms, insects, blackberries and blueberries and raspberries and wild grapes, clams and mussels and crabs, honey and honeybees, any sort of fish they fed him, any sort of meat they fed him, he gulped it all down. They set a place for him at dinner, a bowl and a little low chair like the mermaid's, but without any rockers. At first they had put his bowl of water on the table, but he always knocked it over, so after that they left it in the corner. The bear's table manners were bad, but so were the mermaid's, especially as she couldn't resist throwing the bear pieces of fish. Catching them was what the bear did best. His muzzle would dart out, and his teeth ring shut on them with magical swiftness and certainty, so that you never would have believed how badly he ate out of his bowl. But really, all of them ate as they pleased. The hunter would cut off big pieces of meat with his knife, chew away at them and gulp them down, all the while talking eagerly. He had long ago forgotten how his mother and father ate and made him eat. The bear had no napkin, of course, but neither did the hunter and the mermaid. They wiped their mouths on their arms. At least, though, they didn't lick themselves. The bear licked himself with such big bobbing strokes of his head that he almost lost his balance and fell off his chair. One night the mermaid watched him for a while and said, "He certainly is an inexperienced washer. The more he washes himself, the worse he gets." "The more he washes himself, the worse he looks," said the hunter. "All he does is to get himself wet and rumpled and make his fur stick out every which way. Well, at least he never washes long." "He never does anything long except eat and sleep," the mermaid replied. This was so. After he had just eaten, the bear had a particularly satisfied, good-humored look. His little eyes would twinkle at them, and he would look round benignantly. But soon his wandering eyes would glaze, his eyelids would steal shut and snap open, and then steal shut again, and he would be fast asleep. "We are too," the mermaid would say to the hunter. "You certainly don't have to think of anything for him to do after dinner. Not old eat and sleep," the hunter said. The bear began to snore. The mermaid said, "You walrus!" They couldn't help making fun of their bear. It felt good somehow. He sat there, like a hill, having a nap after dinner, and the mermaid said, yawning, "Having him is very soothing. You get the feeling that nothing can happen to him or you." The bear rolled out of his chair. He took 2 staggering steps toward the fireplace, fell down, and was fast asleep again. "Old eat and sleep," said the hunter contentedly. The bear was a remarkable tree climber. He hung on to the trunk with his front feet and kicked himself up with his hind feet, his paws churning and his claws making big gouges in the trunk. Like some animal that doesn't know how to climb a tree, never has known how to climb a tree, but thinks it will just try anyway, the bear went up the trunk by main force, and he didn't so much climb down as fall, interrupting his plunge with 5 or 6 desperate momentary pauses. If it was an autumn day on which he was climbing, he would end surrounded by nuts and branches and grunting contentedly, would start to gobble up the nuts. One cold afternoon in late autumn, when the hunter came home from the forest, the mermaid met him at the door. Come quick," she said, seizing him by the arm. Her face was worried and miserable. The hunter had never seen her look so miserable. "What is it?" said the hunter. "He's dying," the mermaid said. "I reached in and touched him and he didn't move. He didn't even know I was there, and he's barely breathing. He takes a little faint, slow breath and then doesn't breathe at all. You can count 6 or 7 before he takes another breath." "Oh, Lord," said the hunter. "I knew I should have looked for him when he didn't come home last night. Where is he?" "Up at the cliff, in the tall cave, the narrow one, the one you can barely get inside." They hurried off. "Maybe it was another bear, and he crawled there because he was hurt so bad he couldn't get home," the hunter called back over his shoulder. "Was he bleeding much?" "No, not a bit," the mermaid answered. "He's—" But the hunter, running as fast as he could go, was already too far off to hear her. The mermaid toiled up along the path. When she got near enough to the cliff to see the cave, the hunter had disappeared. She went to the mouth of the cave and peered inside. The hunter was bending over the bear, feeling him, and the bear didn't move. All at once, the hunter straightened up, took a step toward her, and started to laugh. Hearing his echoing laugh, down there in the darkness of the cave, was frightening to the mermaid. But he had such a relieved sound that she cried, "He isn't dying? He's all right?" "He's never been better off in his life," said the hunter. "I forgot you didn't know. He's just asleep for the winter." "For the winter?" "Bears sleep all winter. You know how fat he's been getting. Well, he'll lie here fast asleep till spring, unless there's a warm spell." "And it's all right for him to breathe like that?" "That's the way they all do. You can't wake them. Watch." He got hold of the bear below the shoulders, pulled him up as far as he could, and began to shake him. He shook, and then gave a tremendous shout, one that made the mermaid's ears ring. Not even the bear's breathing changed. "How queer," said the mermaid. "How queer! Oh, I'm so glad he's all right." The hunter lowered the bear to the ground, patted him affectionately, and then climbed out of the cave. The mermaid said, "I think I'll pat him too." She did, and then said sorrowfully, "He won't be with us all winter, every winter." The hunter remembered something the mermaid had said about her sister, and said laughing, "He was all summer. Why do you want him all winter too?" "Oh, I don't know. I'm used to him." They often talked about him that winter. Occasionally the hunter would go to the cave and come back with a cheerful, "Fast asleep." Once the mermaid answered, "It's like that story of your mother's." "Like what?" "Like that story. You know, the Sleeping Beauty one. It's like having that Sleeping Beauty for a pet." They did miss him, and when at last, one foggy morning in March, there was a scratching at the door, and a thin, grumpy, famished bear stuck his nose in over the threshold, they fed him thankfully. How he ate, and how he grew! By the end of the summer, he was so big that, when he ran, he looked like a bed galloping across the meadow. You could hardly believe that so big a thing could move so fast. The bigger the bear got, the wetter the bear got. And there is nothing so noticeable as a wet bear. It rained on the bear forded streams, the bear fished. He would sit or stand in the little river that came down to the sea, with the water boiling up over his back, and snap or bat at the fish swimming up through the white water. And finally, when the rain was over, the river crossed, the fish eaten, the bear would come home. The first year, it was like having a wet St. Bernard come home. The second year, he was more like a wet Shetland pony. The third year, he was like a wet horse in a wet overcoat. Drying him was like drying a marsh. They could have taken everything in the house, rubbed him with it, and in the end they and everything in the house would have been wet and the bear still not dry. He would sit by the fireside in a little pool of water. His fur would steam, and the pool of water would steam. Steam would cover the glass of the window. He would start to shake himself. "No, no, no, no," the hunter and the mermaid would shout. And the bear, their trained bear, wouldn't shake himself. He had learned that when they shouted, "No, no," it meant he mustn't shake himself. Outside, of course, he did. The hunter had once measured, on the beach, the circle the bear made when he shook himself. From the wet center to the imprint of the last scattered drops was 17 steps. The bear's life was placid and uneventful, and he snored or shuffled or galloped through it, grunting in satisfaction. Occasionally, though, he met with accident. One warm, soft afternoon, the hunter and the mermaid were sitting inside, talking, when the bear burst through the doorway, bounded to the bed, and, thrashing and plunging, tried to dig himself in under the bearskin. Just behind him was a cloud of "Bees! Bees!" cried the hunter, slapping his neck. "Bees?" said the mermaid. Then she gave a shriek and clutched her shoulder. Another bee had landed. The hunter seized her, heaved her up into his arms, and staggered out the door. As he ran, he heard the bear groan. Some of the bees must have got in under the bearskin. There were dozens of them just behind the hunter and the mermaid. "Oh!" screamed the mermaid as one of them caught up. The hunter ran very awkwardly and very fast across the meadow to the beach. The tide was in. He splashed through the shallow water, gave 2 desperate plunges that carried them out waist deep, and then fell headlong. The mermaid, flying out of his arms, disappeared into the next wave. Almost before they could get their heads out of the water, the bees were on them. Snorting and blowing, his eyes and nose full of seawater, the hunter heaved and plunged and splashed. A perfect fountain of water and spray rose over him. The mermaid imitated him faithfully for a moment, then lost her balance, fell over, and began to splash as hard as she could with her tail. For the bees, it was like trying to get at 2 geysers under sea. Wet, cold, and discouraged, they began to make larger and larger circles around the 2, and a few of them even turned back toward the beach. "We're getting them! Splash! Splash!" shouted the hunter. In 5 minutes, the last bee was flying sulkily over the beach toward the meadow. The hunter was sitting there panting, with the water up to his neck, and the mermaid was laughing. She laughed so hard that she strangled, stopped till she could get her breath, and then started to laugh all over again. The hunter began to laugh himself. "We're getting them! Splash! Splash!" cried the mermaid, pointing at the hunter and laughing harder than ever. "If that's the way you take it," said the hunter, "I won't give you any advice next time." The mermaid answered, "Just so long as you carry me. How'd you ever get us here so fast?" The hunter said, "I must have been inspired. Oh, that bear of ours. Either we've got to train him to leave bee trees alone, or else we've got to keep the door shut. Let's teach him to run for the beach instead of his bearskin. We can tell him, 'You're a big bear now.'" "I'll go see how it is up at the house," the hunter said. He was soon back. "There's dozens still flying in and out of the door. I don't know where he is. You can see they're just doing it out of habit. They'll be gone by sunset." That night, as the 2 of them were sitting by the fire, all serene except for the clay they'd put on their stings, something scratched at the door. The hunter opened it, and the bear came in. Evidently, he had ended in the water himself. He was sodden, but the water hadn't washed away the big gummy smears of honey and beeswax on his head and shoulders. There were dead bees caught in his fur even. He sat down and began to lick his right front paw. The bare palm had several swollen places on it where the bees had stung him. "Just look at his poor nose," said the mermaid. It was so swollen that, like a man with the mumps, the bear didn't even resemble himself. And yet, he didn't look dissatisfied or miserable, but just sat by them, licking his fur, as if he were home and glad to be home. The harder he licked, the more of a mess he made of himself. As the fire got his wet fur warmer and warmer, a little cloud of steam rose from him. He smelled like 4 or 5 wet dogs and a beehive. Before long, his contented, shining eyes began to get a blurred look. "He's had a full day," the hunter said. "If he's got as much honey inside as outside, he's a full bear," the mermaid replied. "And wax, and bees. Remember, bears eat bees too." "Is there anything anybody in the whole world eats that they don't eat? Have we ever found a single thing that he won't eat?" "Oh, wood. If it's dead wood, he turns it over and rips it up and eats all the grubs and bugs inside. And if it's a live tree, he bats the branches till he's got all the nuts off, and then he eats them. And if it's spring, he eats the buds and the blossoms and the bark on the—" "You're right," said the hunter. The bear's eyes had closed. He began to snore. It was a gentle, peaceable sound. He looked as if he had spent the day dozing by the fireside. "He's got a real gift for getting along in the world," the hunter said admiringly. "Doesn't he look innocent?" The mermaid said, "To think we used to live without a bear." That is the end of Chapter 4, The Bear. I hope you'll join me next time to read Chapter 5, The Lynx. Take care, everyone.